As the only president in history to reach the end of his first year in office with a 32% approval rating, Donald Trump made many losing moves in 2017. It is impossible to list them all. So here is just a sample, starting with following Steve Bannon and Roy Moore to defeat in Alabama. Luther Strange was the Republican senator appointed to fill Jeff Sessions' Senate seat after Donald Trump appointed Jeff Sessions to be his attorney general. Here is the president campaigning for Luther Strange in September by telling Republican voters they could vote for the other guy.
And by the way, both good men. And you know what? And I told Luther, I have to say this, if his opponent wins, I'm going to be here campaigning like hell for him.
Donald Trump's endorsement did not help Luther Strange, who lost in the primary to Steve Bannon's chosen candidate, Roy Moore. And then Roy Moore was accused of sexually assaulting a girl when she was 14 years old and trying to date other girls while they were still in high school. And Roy Moore was a 32-year-old assistant district attorney. Republican Senator Richard Shelby withdrew his support for the Republican ticket and voted for someone else. The Senate Republican Political Action Committee stopped funding Roy Moore's campaign. Mitch McConnell, Republican leader of the Senate, said an ethics investigation of Roy Moore would begin immediately if Roy Moore was elected to the Senate. What did Donald Trump do? President Trump campaigned for the accused child molester.
Get out and vote for Roy Moore. Do it. We need somebody in that Senate seat who will vote for our Make America Great Again agenda.
And once more people voted against Donald Trump on Election Day. And Donald Trump, Roy Moore, and Steve Bannon went down in crushing, humiliating defeat in Alabama, giving us one of the best political sound bites of the year.
Mr. Bannon, this is a huge defeat for you.
The silent humiliation of Steve Bannon. And in Charlottesville, a self-professed neo-Nazi was charged with murder for driving his car into a crowd of peaceful protesters and killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer. The violence in Charlottesville was universally and unequivocally condemned by politicians in both parties, except for one, Donald Trump.
We're closely following the terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, Virginia. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Steve Bannon was, he said, proud of Donald Trump's both sides response. 2 days after President Trump said that, Senator Bob Corker said this.
The president has not yet been able to demonstrate the stability nor some of the competence that he needs to demonstrate in order to be successful.
But only one of President Trump's losing moves will continue to imperil his presidency in the new year. And that, of course, is firing FBI Director James Comey and telling Lester Holt on NBC that he did it essentially to obstruct justice.
Regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey, knowing there was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won.
Joining us now, Joy Reid, MSNBC national correspondent and the host of AM Joy on weekends on MSNBC. And also with us, Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for The Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. And Joy Reid, no question, most important political interview of the year,
Yes.
Mr. Lester Holt, who manages to get, without having to try that hard, get a confession out of the president.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, with all due respect to all the three of us at this table who all do interviews and are all journalists, that is going to turn out, I think, to be the definitive interview of the Trump presidency, quite honestly. Because Lester Holt, who is completely nonpartisan, who's guileless, managed through his guilelessness to get Donald Trump to emote and to, as Donald Trump is wont to do, spill his guts. And he told Lester Holt the thing that will wind up probably undoing Donald Trump's presidency, that he fired Jim Comey, the former director of the FBI, because of the Russia investigation. Up to now, they had had a cover story for why they fired Jim Comey that even included because they thought that he was too cruel to Hillary Clinton, which is insane since Donald Trump despises Hillary Clinton and is obsessed with her. But that confession really does set in motion part two of the Russiagate investigation by Bob Mueller, because track one is whether or not the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. Track two is, did Donald Trump himself obstruct justice? Donald Trump seems to think, yes, he did.
So, Jonathan, firing Comey, it's such a hard thing to choose, but is that the biggest Trump mistake of the year?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Just, you know, recently the president even said what we just saw in the clip there, which is this is a made-up story by the Democrats to explain why they lost the election. He wouldn't have to be saying those things had he not fired Mueller. You know, in a normal presidency, Jim Comey would still be the FBI director. A normal president would allow the FBI to conduct its investigation, would say all the proper things of we need to get to the bottom of this. It means something for our democracy, you know, whatever the Russians did, and we will fully cooperate and leave it at that. But instead, the president decides he wants to not just fight with the Justice Department, fight with the FBI, but fire the FBI director and then keep fighting with everybody who keeps getting closer and closer and closer to him.
And there might not be a special prosecutor if he hadn't fired James Comey. We might or might not. We don't know. Joy, there's a racial line going through Donald Trump's first year of the presidency with the both sides comments, with his rush to support Roy Moore in Alabama, and there seems to be no breaking that spell for Donald Trump.
And for Donald Trump, it's both his own proclivities, which go all the way back to the Nixon administration of all administrations, prosecuting he and his father, essentially charging them with racial discrimination in their housing developments in Queens, not letting black people live there, putting C for colored on their applications, all the way through the Central Park Five and him wanting those 5 accused teenagers who were accused of raping a white woman and who have been since proved innocent by DNA executed, and just his long history of weird racial comments. But you marry that to his decision to tie his fortunes to the alt-right, which is sort of a nice way of saying, you know, white supremacists who have inculcated themselves, they've embedded themselves like a virus inside of the Republican Party. And quite frankly, that group of people has been embedded in the past in the Democratic Party, but they are now fully ensconced in the GOP, and Donald Trump has decided to make common cause with them, with the Bannons, the Breitbarts of the world. So Donald Trump's decision to marry his fortunes to them, his birtherism, his own proclivities, have really lashed him to a kind of a brand of racism that we've never seen this overtly in the White House since Woodrow Wilson.
And Jonathan, it has the president's views on these things have disgusted very prominent Republican Southerners.
Oh, absolutely. Look, again, back to my normal president comment before. A normal president would keep the alt-right at more than arm's length. A normal president would not have a white supremacist just feet from the Oval Office the way Steve Bannon used to be. But yet, even though Steve Bannon is out of the White House, the president, is still consulting with Steve Bannon. And so, you know, to Joy's point, I would just add that every time the president gets into a fight with a person of color, whether they're NFL players, members of Congress like Congresswoman Frederica Wilson of Florida, you name it, it's always playing to his base. His base loves it. If we know anything about President Trump, his job approval rating could be in the 30s. But as long as that base of the Republican Party still cheers him when he goes and does those rallies, still applauds those lines, he's going to give them what they want. And clearly, what they want and what they like is grievance. They're stewed in with racial animosity, and, you know, looking at folks like me and Joy and like wealthy NFL players as spoiled, ungrateful people who should just be happy to be here.
And Joy, it's not that long ago that most of the mainstream media was falling for the idea that Donald Trump was somehow a communications genius because he kept communicating successfully with a minority of American voters,
right,
and came in, far behind Hillary Clinton in the vote on election night. They still thought that was brilliant. And now, in the latest polling, NBC poll, control of Congress for 2018, 50% favor Democrats, 39% favor Republicans, and that's thanks to the genius Donald Trump.
Yeah, and it's funny, the Beltway media has long had this sort of romantic attachment to what they call plain spokenness, right? And seeing anyone who is elite and erudite, and Barack Obama, as somehow revealing of their own elite backgrounds. And so a lot of media tend to want to, cleave toward the plain spoken, the sort of Harry Truman, the simple guy, and they have this sort of love affair with it, right? You saw the J.D. Vance book rocket to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, and this obsession with Trump voters in Kentucky, sort of almost anthropologizing them and going down as if you're sort of in the zoo, looking at the plain or ordinary white working class voter as if they are some sort of like exhibit. And I think that is a problem with media, quite frankly. I think it says something about the East Coast, West Coast sort of version of the media that, that's where the media comes from. But with Donald Trump, this idea that he is some sort of communications genius also comes from the fact that he knows how to use Twitter. But Donald Trump's use of Twitter and his communication has done nothing but hurt him. His communication in Alabama did not help the candidates, both of them, that he wanted to win. It has not helped if he was such a great genius of communication, why is he at 32% bottom of the polls of every president in modern and probably all of presidential history? He's not a communications genius. He just knows who his audience is.
Right.
We're going to have to leave it there. Jonathan Capehart, Joy Reid, thank you very much for joining us
Thanks,
tonight.
Lawrence.
Joy's show, of course, AM Joy. It airs Saturdays and Sundays, 10 a.m. Eastern here on MSNBC.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.